I didn't ruin everything here.
The only words I understood were dricka, fika, and co-worker. The rest could have been anything, absolutely anything. Anyway, it's very nice to see you all. And the first and most important thing you need to know is that I am just the warm-up act for the musical delight which is to follow. So you just have to put up with me for a little while first, and then you get the fun bit with the dricka and the fika. What's this about? Funny word, made-up word. Badvertising. Well, it's about the fact that at the moment, the air pollution alone from the burning of fossil fuels is estimated to kill between 5 and over 8 million people a year. That's about, at the top end, 22,000 people a day. You all see in the news at the moment that wildfires, floods, extreme weather is becoming ever more common. We know this. We know the science. And yet, strangely, change doesn't seem to be happening at anything like the scale or speed that the science tells us is necessary. People still fly around the world for leisure, park their giant fossil fuel powered SUVs outside their very large homes. So what's going on? Why is it that as a species we seem to be actively promoting our own self-destruction? So Badvertising is a campaign. We run from the UK, but also from here in Sweden with my colleague Anna. And it's a campaign to stop adverts fueling the climate emergency and to bring in a tobacco-style ban on advertising and sponsorship, the heavily polluting, high-carbon products, surfaces, and lifestyles. And to put our challenge into perspective, I've put this quote up for you, because sometimes it's hard to imagine change happening until after it's actually happened. And this is a quote from a man who was a senior marketing official for Big Tobacco back in the day before it was banned. And if you can't read it, it says, "The problem is, how do you sell death? How do you sell a poison that kills, at the time, 350,000 people a year, 1,000 people a day? You do it with the great open spaces, the mountains, the open places, the lakes coming up to the shore. They do it with healthy young people. They do it with athletes. How could a whiff of a cigarette be of any harm in a situation like that? It couldn't be. There's too much fresh air, too much health, too much absolute exuding of youth and vitality. That's the way they do it. And advertisers are clever. Much more clever sometimes than we even realize. We all like to think that we are in control of our own destiny, masters of our own lives. And yet advertising has a way of getting under our defenses. And as a little bit of evidence and one example, I want to introduce you to triple dipped chicken. Sorry, you don't have to eat it. There's an outfit, a campaigning group who work on health and food issues in the UK called Bite Back 2030. And they did an experiment when they invited a group of many young people to a sort of upmarket fast food restaurant. They were told they were being invited to this restaurant to take part in a survey. What they didn't know was that in the period of time, the couple of days before, those young people were being very cleverly targeted through their social media, on advertising, by billboards near their homes, even in the taxis, the cabs that were sent to take them to the restaurant. There was a fake radio program which had advertising in it. And this advertising was promoting a particular dish called triple dipped chicken. When all the young people got to the restaurant, they had a menu, and the menu had 50 dishes on it. They were allowed to choose anything they wanted. And you're probably ahead of me at this point, but every single student chose triple dipped chicken that had been marketed at them without them even being aware. Because when they were asked if they had seen any marketing for this particular product, none of them could remember seeing it. Now, if you think that for pretty much every hour of every waking day, we are collectively exposed to advertising in ever more subtle forms through our social media accounts, on the side of buses, on billboards. Just imagine the cumulative effect of all of that conditioning on our life choices. And just to give you one other little example, there was another study done of students, older, slightly college-age students in the United States, where they were invited to play a video game. It was a racing game, just a classic racing video game. Again, what they didn't know is that the games were very subtly and slightly different, and that in some of the games, the cars had no branding on them at all. Others had different corporations, and one of the logos was the Red Bull logo. And they analyzed how these students played this game. And for people, I'm sure everybody's familiar with Red Bull. It's associated with energetic, extreme sports, dynamic lifestyle, sort of, etc., etc. The way the children, the students, the college students who had the Red Bull cars played the game was different. They raced faster and more recklessly. And as a consequence, in the game, they were either more likely to win or crash and die. And once again, when asked about their experience of playing the game afterwards, nobody could remember the particular branding that was on the car. So the associations that had already been planted in their minds about this particular product and the behavior associated with it was physically affecting how they behaved in the real world. And again, just think of all the stuff which we are exposed to. And the brain is able to detect and recognize both a musical audio jingle of part of a corporate identity or a visual logo in a fraction of a second, much, much quicker than you are consciously able to recognize and know what you're looking at. So they're clever people, these marketers. And what we know from research now is that children as young as 2 years old are brand aware, that the kind of pressure that we bring on each other around brands and their popularity, that starts to happen as young as 3 years old. 3-year-olds are judging each other by the different branded goods and clothes that they are wearing. This creates a kind of choice architecture, which is the phrase that they use in the sort of academic study of this, which is lifelong, has a lifelong influence on habits. We know that preschool children recognize more unhealthy than healthy food brands. And recognition of unhealthy food choices shoots up between the ages of 3 and 4. And that children exposed to advertising engage less with other children and have less creative play. And we know, again from research done in the States, that exposure to TV advertising is perhaps the single largest factor in the epidemic of obesity among children in the States. This hasn't been going on for that long. The whole science of advertising as it's emerged can be traced back to the 1920s and 30s when some of the early practitioners, they called themselves consumption engineers. Their job was to engineer consumption. And one of the most famous early architects of the techniques is this chap. This man, with his lovely moustache, is Sigmund Freud's nephew. His name is Edward Bernays. Edward Bernays learnt his trade in the American government in the Department for Military Propaganda during the First World War. He is credited with developing some of the earliest techniques for psychological warfare. And what he realized was that these techniques used to influence public opinion during wartime could just as well and just as easily be applied in peacetime. So he took his techniques of psychological warfare and he rebranded them like a good advertising man. And you know what he called them? He called them public relations. So the advertising industry's genealogical roots go straight back to some of those earliest techniques. So this is playing in the background all the time. And a lot of research has been done on the influence of advertising on our brains and how they receive signals and how they interpret them. And this so-called neuromarketing techniques has been studied. And what we've known now for decades, and I quote from one of the research papers on this, that scary as it may sound, if an ad does not modify the brains of the intended audience, and that's all of us, then it has not worked. So this stuff is playing on you all the time. And there's some very famous examples of industries that have applied these techniques. And I think perhaps it's worth remembering what used to be considered normal. Because when it's considered normal, as tobacco advertising once was. When it was once apparently socially acceptable to have a young girl looking dotingly at an authority figure in a white coat, a doctor, talking about how she would like to grow to be 100 years old in the context of a cigarette advert in which a doctor is endorsing the smoking of Camel cigarettes. Or my favourite, for the sheer brazenness and audacity, the idea that 3 babies, who probably can't even talk yet, are boasting about the fact that their dad smokes Marlboro specifically. This, ladies and gentlemen, was once pretty normal. Now, we recoil from it. But it makes me wonder, what are we surrounded by now that in another 20 years' time we will look back on and think, what the hell were we thinking to be promoting the kind of products and lifestyles that are ultimately undermining our chances of survival? This is another reminder of how far we've come. This is a real advert for an oil company, an American oil company. It was known as Humble at the time. And back then, as you can probably see, they were boasting about how quickly they could melt glaciers back in the day. Now, of course, through the great skill of advertising, they've learned a trick or two. And when you see adverts from oil companies today, they're kind of more likely to look like this. It's remarkable how fossil fuel companies whose businesses, 95% or more fossil fuels. When you see the advertising, quite often you'll see like a wind turbine, and you might get the impression that they're actually renewable energy companies. And the interesting fact, of course, is that with companies like Shell and British Petroleum, who tried to make a big play about moving into greener forms of energy, they've all been selling off their renewables and going back to their core business of digging fossil fuels out of the ground. But I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about one of my favourite subjects, or I suppose you could say one of my least favourite subjects, and that's very large, very polluting cars. And how we've arrived at a situation where, in a very short space of time, we've gone from these types of cars, sports, utility vehicles, SUVs. In fact, in around about a decade, we went from a situation in which they were about 1 in 10 of new car sales to now being over 6 out of 10 of new car sales. How was it that just at the point that the world needed us to be moving to smaller, less dangerous, less polluting cars, the car industry encouraged and persuaded us to do exactly the opposite and shift to larger, more dangerous, more polluting cars? And the way that they did that, I believe, is through marketing. We are in an extraordinary situation in which, according to the International Energy Agency, SUVs, in the decade from 2010, SUVs were the second largest contributor to the increase in global CO2 emissions. And that's after the power sector, but ahead of heavy industry, trucks and aviation. Emissions from the sector could have seen a 30% bigger fall between 2010 and 2022 if car sizes hadn't grown. There's some wonderful research being done to show that cars have been getting bigger, car spreading, or autobesity, as some people call it, at the rate of 1 centimetre every 2 years. Just for my own entertainment, I did a quick calculation to work out what would happen if that didn't stop. And I worked out that by the year 2500, the average car would be the size of a semi-detached house, the width of a semi-detached house in the UK. So we've had this switch of behaviour, which has been entirely driven by the vehicle industry, entirely driven by their marketing. And these are the kind of adverts that you see. I mean, one interesting thing is that we know that around about 3/4 of SUVs, certainly in the UK, and it's a similar pattern in most other countries, these vehicles that were designed to be working vehicles in the countryside, well, 3/4 of them are sold within cities now. The highest concentration of ownership in the UK is in a part of London called the London Borough of Kensington and Chelsea. It's the richest, one of the most densely populated bits right in the city centre. And I can tell you, there is no functional reason why you would need a car like this in the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea, unless you simply wanted to block the road by the sheer width of the car that you were driving. But look at the adverts, and invariably what do you see? You see them not stuck in traffic, where they normally are in big cities, but out on their own, on a country road, without another vehicle in sight. Or you see them in an advert like this, where the model that you can see here has about 3 times the emissions of the recommended EU for an average car, and you see it happily going off the road into some sun-dappled bit of woodland. And the phrase, "life is so much better without restrictions," is even more cynical and poignant, because this was an advert that was published at the height of the COVID pandemic in London, when people in the UK and globally, when obviously we were having public health restrictions on a movement to save people's lives. But at the time they played it like this. And I also find the other one kind of amusing, because, you know, obviously one of the things we're getting with climate change and fossil fuel pollution is more extreme weather, more floods. And so they show one of their cars in going through a flooded road with the phrase "now streaming." I find this extraordinary. And there's been another aspect to this in that it's led to the very peculiar situation where in 2019 in the UK, there were 150,000 cars sold that were too big for a standard parking space. I checked in with some of my colleagues who work on this issue. That figure has now gone up to about 1.2 million cars sold that are too big for a standard parking space. I think this is an issue that perhaps has got slightly out of control, and it's driven by marketing and advertising. And it's not just cars, of course, although that is a very clear example in which our behavior and our purchasing patterns have been re-engineered by marketing. But in another area, a high-polluting area, flying. Now, the issue with flying is perhaps even more extreme because there is no technological solution. There's no easy substitution at scale. This is what all the research is telling us at the moment. And if you remember from your news screens and your newspapers, both this year and last year, large parts of southern Europe in the extreme heat and drought, we were seeing wildfires, the kind of which we've never experienced before. Now, it's not enough, of course, that we have all this general advertising encouraging us not to think twice about flying around the world and all that implies, but they were actually selling flights to the very places that were going up in flames while they were going up in flames. And this struck me so much that I wrote an article for the English newspaper, The Guardian. The article appeared in the online edition of the paper, and I got a text message from a friend of mine who said, you should look at the piece you've just written about how airline advertising is encouraging people to fly to the very places that are going up in flames because of climate change, because of the pollution from flying there. And there in the middle of my article was an advert for short-haul flights to the places that were going up in flames. It's kind of, you couldn't make it up. Why is it that we are promoting our own self-destruction? Another area where you see an awful lot of this is in the world of sport. Now, sport used to be absolutely covered with tobacco advertising. When I was a kid, I'm English, so I was kind of into cricket. I used to go and watch cricket when I was about 10, 11. There was a competition called the Benson and Hedges Cup, sponsored by Benson and Hedges cigarettes. They used to hand out free cigarettes. You know, no worry that there were like 10 and 11-year-old kids in the crowd kind of watching. That was pretty normal. And a big part of the campaign to end tobacco advertising was fought through sponsorship of sport. And of course, one of the very reasons that tobacco companies wanted to sponsor sport was because it's associated with youth and vigor and healthy activity. Of course they would want to do that. And of course, because you get a massive global audience. Now, I invite you the next time you see sport on TV, look at the sponsors on the side of the pitch and around the court. And I can almost guarantee it will be significantly car makers, airlines, and fossil fuel companies. I was watching tennis, it was the Australian Open, and the three courtside sponsors were exactly that: a car maker, an airline, and a fossil fuel company. It's incredible how often that is the case. And sometimes it becomes, in my personal opinion, even more cynical, where you see fossil fuel companies sponsoring cycling. If there's one thing that should be the poster child for a more sustainable way of getting around, it's cycling. So what do the fossil fuel companies do? Brilliant opportunity to make ourselves look better. Let's get our logos all over them. Shell sponsored British cycling. It caused such a furor, such an argument that the chief executive was forced to resign. And it led to some campaigners doing this on a billboard near the headquarters of British Cycling. If you can't read up with it, they sort of reinterpreted the advert, and it says, "We've teamed up with British Cycling to help us fast track the apocalypse." I don't know how long it stayed up, or if anybody noticed it was a spoof. We're beyond the age of satire. And sometimes it goes to extreme lengths. Ineos is one of the world's biggest petrochemical companies. It sponsors one of the world's most elite cycle teams. You see them in the Tour de France and the Vuelta and the other big ones. But not only that, but they named their cycling team after not only are they a petrochemical company, they've also started making a giant diesel-powered sports utility vehicle called the Ineos Grenadier. They've named their cycle team the Ineos Grenadiers. They're named after an SUV. I think that takes us into really strange territory. I thought you would like this. I wanted to mention a piece of work that my colleague Anna here has done as well. You see this issue of sponsorship of sport by major polluters in, unfortunately, in snow sports. If it couldn't be more ironic that you might have sponsors who are melting the very snow upon which your sport depends. But I do believe it's the case that a little ski race you've got called the Vasaloppet just happens to be sponsored by Priam and Volvo. And we might have just done a little calculation which worked out that the pollution from those two corporations alone is enough to melt an area of snow about 230 times the size of the 90-kilometre Vasaloppet race. Now, I don't think that is really tenable, so we want to do something about it. We want to see an end to sponsorship and advertising by major polluters. And we know that when you remove this kind of advertising, it works. It doesn't work just to have positive messaging about green alternatives. That gets drowned out by the negative marketing of heavily polluting products. In London, after a long debate, there was a ban on junk food on our transport system. And they had the presence of mind to study what the impact of this was. And after removing those adverts, they found that the average calorie intake of a typical London household in a fairly quick period of time, within 6 to 9 months, went down by about 1,000 calories a week. So if you take away the thing which affects your choice in that way, then you do see change. So we've been running a campaign, and as part of that campaign, because the government wasn't doing enough, we thought we would invent our own government department, which we called the Ministry for the Climate Emergency. And it's been running its own campaigns. I'm just going to show you a few little examples of the way we've been trying to reinterpret adverts for cars and aeroplanes and the like. And first of all, we thought what we would do is we would play the advertisers at their own game and we would rebrand them. So we rebranded advertising as brain pollution and produced these helpful public information things where you can read about the background. We produced a helpful campaign to alert people to the issue. You have brain pollution, act now before it's too late. Find out how advertising is promoting the climate crisis. We looked at the marketing of cars and came up with a different way of talking about the issues. It's remarkable, the slightest excuse they have to try and create the impression that these giant cars are environmentally friendly. A little bit of that, and we took our message to our actual government department that has some say over this issue. This may seem like a kind of extreme version of a message, but there is actually a part of the brain that lights up when you recognize logos and brand jingles. So advertising really does, remember that quote, it really does rewire your brain. And that's what that was a reference to. A few examples for how we can do different forms of aviation advertising. Air travel ads are whipping up a storm. My favorite one here, get planes on the brain. We made our artwork available. Anybody could download it off our website. And then we discovered that someone had actually printed off and turned it into an advert and gone and posted it up over the real adverts, which I thought was an interesting take. Got reported in the press. And we also interpreted our new ministry. We imagined it being available in a range of other European countries. So lots of ministries for the climate emergency, running public information campaigns that can help reverse the damage that's been done to get us addicted to these high carbon lifestyles and products and services. And we've been having some success too in our policy work to try and push this through government. This is a quote from a report from the UK House of Lords, that's our second chamber, where in 2022 they accepted the argument that, I quote, the government should introduce measures to regulate advertising of high carbon and environmentally damaging products. And we've been taking the message to the advertising agencies themselves who work for these, putting a bit of pressure on them. companies, and they are getting itchy, and people working within advertising are getting itchy about working on the briefs for these big polluters. And councils at different levels of government, from major cities in the UK, places like Edinburgh and Sheffield and Norwich, the region of Gothenburg is another example. The Hague recently upgraded a policy to ban fossil fuel adverts to a law banning fossil fuel adverts. And there is momentum building internationally with people at that level of government. We're looking to break through to the national level. And there was the beginnings of a policy moving in that direction in Spain recently, touching on car adverts. So we're starting to get a bit of breakthrough there. And earlier this year, the Secretary General of the United Nations gave a speech in which he called on countries to end fossil fuel advertising. And his precise words were, if you recognize this still from a certain famous TV program called Mad Men, which was about the heyday of the advertising industry in the 1960s, referencing this series called Mad Men, he said, it's time for the madmen to stop fueling the madness. And I couldn't agree more. If you want to find out a bit more about this, we've done a lot of research. We've got background reports on this, all on badverts.org. That's the campaign website. And so I would just repeat with our message is really quite a simple one, that it's time to stop promoting our own self-destruction and to stop adverts fueling the climate emergency. When you think of all the other things we have to do to prevent climate breakdown, the shift to different energy supplies, the reworking of our transport infrastructure, the retrofitting of homes, the very simplest thing we could do is to stop actively promoting pollution. So that's my call to you. Please get involved. Speak to Anna because she's helping to run the campaign here in Sweden. We want everybody's support. Everybody can help by getting involved, asking their local councils to adopt these kind of policies. It's really taking off in some countries like the Netherlands. There's a real momentum building there. And I would just finish with one image, which is I saw, this was like a removal van that pulled up outside my house in London. And I just thought, ads removal, great. That's what we need, a service to remove all the ads. Thank you very much for listening. If anybody's got any questions, I'm very happy to take them. Thank you. Oh, I was going to finish with a quote. A poet from, it's just a quote from a poet called Ogden Nash. It's a very, very, very short poem written bizarrely quite a few years ago. And it goes like this. I think that there is an editorial link involved here to the musical second half. It goes like this. I think that I shall never see a billboard lovely as a tree. Perhaps unless the billboards fall, I'll never see a tree at all.
So thank you, Andrew. Are there any questions? Is it okay? So.
Really good questions win prizes, by the way. I've got something here. It's hazard tape. It's got some words on it. It says, warning, adverts heat the planet. Now, I didn't realize this, but when we ordered it, there's a feature of this tape that if you wet the back, it sticks on things. So if you see something that perhaps you don't necessarily like, you know, I'm not directing you to do anything, but it's just a possibility. So good questions win hazard tape.
Okay, here's one. The guys you are fighting, they are loaded with money and resources, and they're also very skilled. Can you like give an example of the resistance you are facing when you try to fight these guys?
Yeah, I can actually. It is interesting that I think one of the areas where we've been pushing for councils to, I mean, basically, most councils also, most levels of government, they will have a list on areas of advertising that they control, things on transport systems and on sites owned by councils. They will always have a list of products that they will already not accept advertising for. Tobacco, dangerous goods, blah, blah, blah. And at its simplest level, what we're asking is that they add to that list heavily polluting products and services. what we found quite subtly that the advertisers are doing behind the scenes is telling councils that they will lose money if they add these things to their list. Actually, where research has been done, and research has been done in Australia, is that if there's any loss at all, it's absolutely marginal and probably doesn't last very long. It's just until other advertisers come in. And our response to that, of course, is that one of the big arguments that the tobacco industry used when the pressure was on for a tobacco ad ban was exactly the same thing, that people needed the income. But of course, we did that and the world adjusted. So that's one particular area where we think there is this quite subtle pushback. But we think the evidence is on our side. That was a good question. You get to win the hazard.
Yes.
Oh, sorry, on the head. Fortunately, it's quite soft. You could always stick a bit on the forehead as well.
So thanks a lot for a very interesting lecture. I have a couple of questions. So one is like, how are you, like your movement, how is it organized? Is it like an NGO, a foundation, or do you work together with other NGOs? How did it start? This come about? How are you financed? And also, did the British government ever give any official answer to this House of Lords recommendation or proposal? And also, can you tell us something about your book?
What a nice question. Did I mention I've got a book? On the first one, it's a really good question, actually. It's an issue that I have felt that I wanted to work on for a long time. And then about just over 5 years ago, we were invited to make suggestions about what can actually help shift behavior to become more sustainable. And I thought, and had thought for a long time, that, I mean, the thing about advertising, it's so pervasive, it's so all around us, that it becomes almost invisible. And I wanted to do something that brought it into view, because I thought it was one of the things which answered the issue about why is it that we get no change? We get the scientific advice coming in one ear, and yet the mixed message, because our day-to-day experience is to be bombarded with messages that say, no, don't worry, just keep living as you are, it's fine, keep flying, keep driving, blah, 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 blah. That I really wanted to do something about it. So we were able successfully to come up with a proposal that convinced a charitable foundation to give us the money to start the Badvertising campaign. And since then, actually, lots and lots of other organizations have started working on this internationally. And there had been some organizations that were more generally critical of advertising, that wanted to see a limit to the influence of advertising over people's lives. And interestingly, there's a historic debate in the United States. There are some states that limit outdoor advertising for peaceful aesthetic reasons as much as anything else. And interestingly, in the Brazilian city of Sao Paulo, there was a conservative governor in the noughties who wanted to improve the quality of life and remove that kind of constant pressure to consume from people. And there was an outdoor advertising ban there. So it's not entirely new, but in the last few years, it has grown. And there is now an international network of organizations working on this in the States, in the UK, across Europe. And we do meet up occasionally to sort of see what's working. And sometimes we do joint complaints about advertising. Even though they're very weak, we use the existing regulatory system to complain about individual adverts. But we're learning lessons from each other about how to get policies adopted and how to push it up towards higher levels of government. And as I say, there's been a few moves in France and in Spain where things are being debated. In the UK, we had a more recent debate after we got over 100,000 signatures on a petition, which meant we had a formal parliamentary debate. The official position of the government, unfortunately, we have a Labour government, and you might expect them to be more progressive. Actually, it's probably one of the most right-wing Labour governments we've ever had. And I think the situation is that we still need to create a lot more pressure on them to get them to move in the right direction. What they said was, their precise wording was, they had no plans at the moment to do this. But we did get people speaking from all the main parties, apart from the Conservatives, so the Greens, the Liberal Democrats, and some of the backbench Labour MPs, speaking in favour of this. And we're going to be doing a lot more work in Parliament to kind of push this issue. We suspect, we hope, we think that come the next election, the Labour government, because of the track record that it's had, might be looking for easier to implement good green policies to make them look a bit better than they're looking at the moment. And there might be an opportunity then.
Was that? Did you have a third question? I don't remember. Was that answered?
He got 3 whole questions in. He was very clever.
Yeah, the book. Yes, the book.
Oh, the book. There's a book available from all good leading online retailers. And I believe Anna is going to order some copies for...
That's the plan.
That's the plan. But yeah, you can get it. It's available. It's available online. If you want to do the right thing and buy it from the independent publisher, Pluto Books, you can look up Pluto Books and you'll find the paperback edition, which is cheaper than the hardback edition, now available and updated and readily available.
And he deserves the tape.
Probably deserves 3 bits of tape for asking 3 questions. I'm going to roll it really tightly and see if its aerodynamic form will mean I can throw it further before it hits someone in the head. It's getting tighter, which means it's also going to be harder. So I want you to pay attention. I'm not insured. We can take another question while I do this. Coming over. Oh, hit the ceiling. Didn't even think of that.
Thank you very much. It was both inspiring and important. But I wonder, where do you draw the line about the big polluters? Because everything is polluting. So say something about that.
That's a really good question. And the reality is that in the way that these policies are being passed, it's different everywhere. Some Dutch cities have gone so far, they've included things like big luxury cruise liners, because per capita taking a journey in a big luxury cruise liner, the emissions can be even worse than a plane. Some people who have been, I mean, the big ticket items in terms of our emissions are the energy we use, how we travel around, and our diets. Diet is choices you make in your diet have a big climate impact. And red meat is a big ticket item. Beef in particular is a big emissions ticket item. And some of the Dutch municipalities have gone as far as including red meat in their bans. But the reality is it's playing out differently everywhere. But mostly the ones which the areas which are covered most typically are fossil fuel companies themselves, aviation, and fossil fuel powered cars. These are the 3 main items. But yeah, it's up for debate how much further you could push it. And as I say, some people are putting it into other areas where our lifestyles have big climate impacts.
Thank you. Tape.
Whose eye shall I take out this time? I'm going to run over with this one.
So, how much time do I gave you my
We probably should take a break for drinks before we come back for the really fun bit. Yes. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, we are at top. We're at 7:20, so we should probably take a 10-minute break.
Yeah.
Yeah. Should we take a 10-minute break? Is that okay? Grab a drink and then come back. Honestly, if you haven't heard Trio play before, you are in for a treat. So I would grab a drink and come back for a musical delight.
Thank you.
Let's go.
Yeah.
And there's a couple more bits here if anybody wants some.